Fantastic. I would say the story of today a bit slightly differently. I can tell you the story of how and why I started to work here, and why I started to work for an organization that works on a more digital and better working public administration in Berlin. It's because I actually, and that has something to do with the academic work that I did earlier. I wrote my PhD. I usually try and say I'm not a corruption expert, slight difference. But even though I know a lot about, should I come for the sender thing? So I, for about 7 years, I looked at what corruption is, how you fight corruption, and what can we do against it, and different levels of corruption. It's okay. It's not very extensive slides. It's because it's a very spontaneous presentation. And actually, the reason why is this morning I spoke to Toby, and Toby said, shit, I was keynote speaker counselor. I said, oh no, I was really excited about the meetup today because checks and balances have a lot to do with the work I did for 7 years. So please tell me we're still having the meetup. He said, well, we wanted a second speaker, like someone who can give another input. And I said, okay, I can tell you it's about something that happens when you do not have checks and balances. And that might be a good introduction for a meetup on checks and balances. So this is why I'm here talking to you about corruption. Because what is corruption actually? It's a topic that is very much getting thrown around, right? And actually thrown around for very bad reasons sometimes. I don't know of Istanbul, and also main hopeful of the Turkish opposition, was arrested a couple of weeks ago on charges of corruption, which, if you ask me, are probably bogus. But very often this term is getting misused. And however, corruption still is a big problem, and one problem that we get when we do not have checks and balances. So I did a classical thing. I gave you 3 definitions here of corruption that will give you some picture of what it actually is. So a dictionary, you can find out different things. Like one definition of corruption is a departure from the original of what is pure or correct. So something that is not normal in a way is corrupt. Another one would be to say dishonest or illegal behavior, especially of powerful people, and often that includes bribery. We have the United Nations Convention Against Corruption document that I very often read, that says corruption involves acts such as bribery, embezzlement, trading in influence, and abuse in functional positions. And summarized together by Transparency International, which is the international NGO that deals the most with corruption, is corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And let's think what that means. So a public official, for example, that you vote in has entrusted power, right? You entrust the person with power. But also me as Lisa's boss, I have entrusted power because my organization that I work for gave me power. If I now misuse this power for my private gain, for example, when I'm a public official and I give a contract to someone who gives me money for the contract rather than to the best organization, that is corruption. So simple. Or if I, for example, hire my nephew rather than hiring the person that is most competent to do that. And that's how you get to these different definitions here of bribery, for example, when you pay someone for influence, embezzlement, when you steal money from a position, trading in influence, when you say I give you influence and you give me your influence. So when they do all these different things. But what does this now have to do with checks and balances? We'll get there, but first, what is the problem with corruption? I don't have actually a slide for that, but that is something that you find a lot of studies on, and some of them which I read. You can find a lot of things that countries that are more corrupt have much worse results in their public services. So they don't have proper service provision. There's also a mistrust in democracy, and mistrust in the state, which again leads for people being unhappy, often leading to social unrest. In states with a lot of corruption, you often have shoddy buildings, you have problems with building size. And for example, at the moment, you have demonstrations in Serbia because of the corrupt system in which people were died in a club because the building inspections weren't properly led through because of corruption, because people were actually bribed not to do that. And there's a lot of things that are associated with corruption. And what I want is, and now let's see if Martin's trick here works. No. It's bad. Fine, it's not there. Is two things. And the other website there.
Yeah, how widespread is corruption? Look.
So corruption is a thing that is very, very hard to measure. Sorry. It's very hard to measure because corruption is something that happens usually in the dark, right? You don't know if someone was bribed, or you don't tell someone that you were bribed or that you stole money. So it's something like, it's a crime that once you know about, it usually doesn't happen anymore, because then it wouldn't, then you know, corruption is something that happens in the dark. It's something that if it's uncovered, it's not that possible anymore. So it's very hard to estimate. So usually how we find out how we measure how corrupt a country is corruption perception indices. So people are asked in different surveys, how corrupt do you perceive your countries, and that then get aggregated. And the most known of that is the Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International. And that gives you some view of what the least and most corrupt countries are. So usually on the first three places are Denmark, Finland, and Singapore. New Zealand, Luxembourg, Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands. Basically all countries which are a democracy, except for Singapore, which has just a very, very strong judiciary that has absolutely no tolerance for corruption or corrupt activities. What's quite interesting is that you have some countries like Uruguay, for example, a few places ahead of Germany, something that in sort of typical storytelling, you would be surprised that a country from Latin America is about Germany, but it's because Uruguay also did a lot of reforms in anti-corruption, and Uruguay put a lot of effort into reforming its public systems in order to reduce corruption in their public administration. And then just a quick word how checks and balances are linked to that. You basically have of research that went into these countries that I just showed you and how they did it, and what happens in those that they are not as corrupt. And public services are amongst sort of the most important place where usually reforms start. You usually have countries that are the least corrupt have a strong judicial independence, so they have a judiciary that is independent from the government, that can actually pursue corruption cases. You have a free press that can report on corruption. You have budget transparency, for example. So basically, the state has to show where the money that it takes in from taxes goes and where it doesn't. You have transparency from the administration. So, for example, through freedom of information laws and proactive publication of data. Again, helps against corruption. Usually, you have a low administrative burden and trade openness, so less moments where you can actually be incentivized to bribe someone or to get around red tape, because there is less red tape. And you have a higher amount of online services, and that's something actually I worked on in my PhD. I looked at how different online services and how different online platforms can actually help in order to reduce corruption. One of them, an important one, is, for example, transparency and automation in the context of public procurement. So in the way that the public purse spends money, or the public administration spends money, to make this more transparent and make it more orderly, which usually often is done through. And generally also, like, in order by reforming public services, so they work better and they have specific rules that they stick to, and that they can also that also have like a proper public service delivery. And that was basically my short input today. It's like, why do we need checks and balances like judiciary and a public service that work well in order to prevent corruption, in order to make public services run properly? And that's why I suggested I would speak before you, Ann-Kathrin, because you will speak actually on how public services get better by bringing different people in the administration together and reforming them. And that's how I will hand over to you.